The morning sun cast long shadows across the Fort Bragg training grounds as Staff Sergeant Sarah Chun adjusted her pack straps one final time. The weight distribution felt perfect, but she knew that wouldn't matter to the dozen pairs of eyes watching her every move. 3 months into the most grueling military training program in the world, she had learned to ignore the whispers that followed her like smoke. "Look at her struggle with that pack," muttered Corporal Davidson from the group of male trainees gathered near the obstacle course. His voice carried just loud enough for Sarah to hear, which she suspected was intentional. "No way she makes it through Hell Week." Sarah kept her eyes forward, focusing on the instructor approaching their formation. Master Sergeant Rodriguez had a reputation that preceded him like thunder before lightning. 2 decades of special operations had carved lines into his face that told stories of missions most soldiers could only imagine. His dark eyes swept across the assembled trainees with the precision of a sniper scope. "Today we separate the pretenders from the contenders," Rodriguez announced, his voice cutting through the humid North Carolina air. "You've survived the basic requirements to get here. Now we find out who belongs in this program and who needs to find a nice desk job." The selection program for the 75th Ranger Regiment's new integrated combat unit had attracted volunteers from across all military branches. Sarah had fought tooth and nail for her spot here, enduring months of paperwork battles and proving herself worthy of consideration. Being one of only 3 women in a class of 47 candidates made every stumble feel magnified, every success feel diminished. "Chun," Rodriguez's voice snapped her to attention. "Yes, Master Sergeant." "Your point on the navigation exercise." Led this sorry group through the Pine Barrens. 15 miles, full gear, 4-hour time limit. He handed her a GPS unit and map case. "Lose anyone, and the whole class repeats today's training." Sarah felt the weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders like a lead blanket. She could sense the resentment radiating from her fellow trainees. Putting her in charge wasn't just a test of her leadership abilities. It was a setup for spectacular failure that would validate every doubt her male counterparts harbored about women in combat roles. "Roger, Master Sergeant," she replied, accepting the equipment with steady hands. As the formation broke up to begin the exercise, Davidson fell into step beside her. At 6'2", with the build of a linebacker, he made Sarah feel even smaller than her 5'6" frame. His presence was meant to intimidate, and she had to admit it was working. "Don't screw this up for all of us," he said quietly, his breath hot against her ear. "Some of us actually deserve to be here." Sarah stopped walking and turned to face him directly. Around them, the other trainees continued their preparations, but she could feel their attention like static electricity in the air. This was a moment that would define how the rest of her training would proceed. "The only thing I'm going to screw up," she said, her voice level but carrying an edge that could cut glass, "is anyone's day who can't keep pace with a girl." Davidson's jaw tightened, and for a moment Sarah thought he might do something stupid that would get them both kicked out of the program. Instead, he stepped back and forced a smile that looked more like a grimace. "We'll see about that." The Pine Barrens stretched out before them like a green ocean of pine trees and sandy soil. Sarah had studied the topographical maps for hours the night before, memorizing elevation changes and landmark features. Navigation had always been one of her strongest skills, honed during years of competitive orienteering in college and refined through her previous military training. She gathered the group around her, spreading the map on a fallen log. "We'll take the northeast route through sectors 7 and 8, she explained, tracing their path with her finger. "It's longer than the direct route, but the terrain is more forgiving and we'll have better visibility for the final checkpoint." "That's going to add at least a mile to our route," protested Sergeant Williams, a veteran infantryman from the 82nd Airborne. "We should take the river valley straight through." Sarah shook her head. "The river valley looks shorter on paper, but there's a reason they call it the Devil's Throat. Spring rains turned it into a swamp. We'll lose more time fighting through mud than we'll save on distance." "How would you know?" Davidson interjected. "When have you ever been through terrain like this under combat load?" "I've been through worse," Sarah replied simply, folding the map and securing it in her cargo pocket. "Anyone who can't handle 15 miles in 4 hours needs to reconsider their career choices." She shouldered her pack and started walking, not bothering to look back. After a moment of hesitation, she heard the sound of boots following her into the forest. The first hour passed in relative silence, broken only by the steady rhythm of boots on pine needles and the occasional rustle of wildlife in the underbrush. Sarah maintained a pace that was aggressive but sustainable, checking her GPS every few minutes to confirm their bearing. Behind her, she could hear the ragged breathing of trainees already struggling with the combination of heat, humidity, and heavy equipment. "Water break," called out Private Martinez, the youngest member of their group at 19 years old. Sweat poured down his face despite the early morning hour. "Negative," Sarah replied without slowing down. "We hydrate on the move. We're already behind optimal pace." She heard grumbling from behind, but ignored it. Leadership meant making unpopular decisions, and she had learned that lesson the hard way during her previous deployment to Afghanistan. There, hesitation and poor timing had cost lives. Here, it would only cost grades, but the principles remained the same. The terrain began to climb as they entered the second sector, and Sarah could hear the group spreading out behind her. She adjusted her pace slightly, knowing that maintaining group cohesion was more important than individual speed. The GPS showed they were still on track to make their time limit, but the margin for error was shrinking. "Chun, we need to talk," Davidson called out as they crested a small ridge. Sarah held up her hand, signaling for a brief halt. She pulled out her binoculars and scanned the valley ahead, noting the position of the next checkpoint marker. Everything looked good from a navigation standpoint, but she could sense tension building within the group like pressure in a boiler. "Talk fast," she said, lowering the binoculars. "Half the group is struggling to maintain this pace," Davidson said, gesturing toward the stragglers behind them. "We're going to lose people if we don't slow down." Sarah looked back at their formation, noting which individuals were showing signs of fatigue. Martinez was struggling the most, but he was also carrying more weight than his small frame should realistically handle. Williams looked solid despite his earlier complaints. Two of the other trainees were breathing hard but still functional. "The pace stays," she decided. "Anyone who falls behind can explain to Master Sergeant Rodriguez why they couldn't handle a basic conditioning march." "This isn't about conditioning," Davidson shot back. "This is about you trying to prove something by pushing everyone beyond reasonable limits." The accusation hung in the air like smoke from a gunshot. Sarah felt every eye in the group focus on her, waiting to see how she would respond. This was the moment Davidson had been building toward since the exercise began, and she realized he had been planning this confrontation from the start. "The only thing I'm proving," she said quietly, "is that some people look for excuses while others look for solutions. Which one are you?" Davidson's face flushed red, but before he could respond, the sharp crack of a branch breaking echoed through the forest behind them. Sarah immediately dropped to one knee and held up her fist, signaling for silence. Everyone froze, their petty arguments forgotten in the face of potential threat. Sound discipline was critical during this type of training exercise. Instructors were known to place observers throughout the course to evaluate noise management and tactical awareness. A broken branch could mean someone was following them, testing their ability to detect surveillance. Sarah strained her ears, listening for any sign of movement. The forest had gone unnaturally quiet, as if every living thing was holding its breath. After 30 seconds of absolute silence, she slowly rose to her feet and motioned for the group to continue moving. "Stay alert," she whispered as they resumed their march. "We might have company." The dynamics of the group shifted immediately. Petty complaints about pace and leadership evaporated as everyone focused on their surroundings. Sarah felt a grim satisfaction at the change, but she also recognized that external pressure had accomplished what her authority could not. As they descended into the next valley, Sarah caught a glimpse of movement in her peripheral vision. A figure in camouflage was keeping pace with them about 50 meters to their left, moving through the trees with practiced stealth. She pretended not to notice while adjusting their route slightly to maintain distance from their shadow. "Davidson," she called softly, waiting for him to move up beside her. "Left flank, 11 o'clock position. We got a tail." Davidson followed her gaze and nodded grimly. "Instructor evaluation?" "Most likely." but we treat it as hostile until proven otherwise. The rest of the march took on the character of a tactical movement rather than a training exercise. Sarah found herself falling into old habits from her deployment, scanning for threats and cover while maintaining their navigation requirements. The group moved with increased coordination, their earlier conflicts forgotten in the face of shared purpose. When they finally reached the checkpoint, Master Sergeant Rodriguez was waiting for them with a stopwatch and clipboard. His expression revealed nothing as he recorded their arrival time and began checking names off his roster. 3 hours, 47 minutes, he announced, within acceptable parameters. His eyes found Sarah in the group. Chun, front and center. Sarah jogged forward and came to attention. Staff Sergeant Chun reporting, Master Sergeant. How did your team perform today? The team completed the mission within time limits and maintained cohesion throughout the exercise, Master Sergeant. Rodriguez studied her for a long moment, his dark eyes unreadable. And the friction between team members? Sarah felt her stomach drop. Of course, he had been monitoring their radio communications and probably had observers reporting on group dynamics. Nothing in this program happened without careful scrutiny. Resolved through focus on mission accomplishment, Master Sergeant. Good answer. Rodriguez made a note on his clipboard. But next time, resolve it before it becomes a distraction. He looked past her to address the entire group. You have 1 hour to eat and prepare for afternoon training. Dismissed. As the group dispersed toward the chow hall, Sarah found herself walking alone. The temporary unity forged during the march had evaporated as quickly as it had formed. She was back to being the outsider, the woman who didn't belong, the weak link that everyone was waiting to see fail. Not bad for a girl, Martinez said quietly as he fell in a step beside her. Thanks for not leaving me behind when I was struggling. Sarah looked at the young soldier with surprise. We succeed or fail as a team. That's not negotiable. Martinez nodded seriously. Some of the guys don't see it that way. Some of the guys need to adjust their perspective, Sarah replied. This program will do that for them, whether they like it or not. As they approached the dining facility, Sarah caught sight of Colonel Harrison observing from the steps of the headquarters building. The commanding officer of their training battalion was legendary among Special Operations Forces, a man whose reputation had been forged in the crucible of decades of warfare. His presence at what should have been a routine training exercise struck her as unusual. Colonel Harrison's eyes met hers across the distance, and Sarah felt a chill run down her spine that had nothing to do with the afternoon breeze. There was something in his gaze that suggested he knew more about her than what appeared in her official records. Something that would change everything. The afternoon training session would prove to be a test unlike anything Sarah had experienced. As she sat down to eat her meal, she had no idea that her entire future hung in the balance of decisions made long before she ever set foot on this base. But across the compound, in a secure office filled with classified files and decorated with commendations from conflicts spanning 3 decades, Colonel Harrison was making a phone call that would alter the trajectory of her military career forever. Yes, sir, he said into the secure line. She's here. And based on what I observed today, the Black Viper assessment was correct. The classified briefing room in Building 18 was a place Sarah had never seen before, and according to her security clearance, she had no business being there. The walls were lined with maps marked with symbols she didn't recognize, and multiple secure communication terminals hummed quietly in the background. The air conditioning worked overtime against the North Carolina heat, but Sarah still felt sweat beading on her forehead as she waited at attention. Colonel Harrison sat behind a metal desk that looked like it had survived multiple wars, reviewing a file so thick it could have been a phone book. The silence stretched between them like a taut wire, broken only by the soft shuffling of papers and the distant sound of training exercises continuing outside. At ease, Chin, the colonel finally said without looking up. Take a seat. Sarah moved to the single chair positioned in front of the desk, her mind racing through every possible reason she might have been summoned to this meeting. Had she made a critical error during the morning exercise? Was her security clearance being reviewed? Had someone filed a complaint about her leadership during the navigation training? Colonel Harrison closed the file and leaned back in his chair, studying her with eyes that had seen more warfare than most soldiers could imagine. His uniform displayed ribbons Sarah recognized from news reports about classified operations, conflicts that officially never happened, and victories that would never be publicly acknowledged. "Do you know why you're here, Staff Sergeant?" "No, sir," Sarah replied honestly. "Your performance in training has been adequate," Harrison said, the word adequate carrying more weight than any criticism. "Your instructors report that you meet minimum standards for physical conditioning, demonstrate competent tactical knowledge, and show acceptable leadership potential under stress." Sarah waited for the other's shoe to drop. In her experience, positive evaluations delivered by senior officers usually preceded very bad news. However, Harrison continued, "There are certain aspects of your background that require clarification before your training can continue." He opened another file, this one significantly thinner than the first. Sarah caught a glimpse of photographs and documents that made her stomach clench with recognition. Her childhood home in San Francisco. School records from institutions she hadn't attended in 15 years. Images of people she hoped never to see again. Sarah Elizabeth Chun, born October 15, 1995, to Dr. Michael Chun and Dr. Linda Wang Chen. Both parents were prominent researchers in biochemical engineering at UC San Francisco. Harrison's voice took on the tone of someone reading from an official report. "You were homeschooled until age 14, then attended private academy through high school graduation. Exceptional performance in mathematics and sciences, multiple scholarship offers to prestigious universities." Sarah kept her expression neutral, but inside she felt the familiar cold dread that accompanied any discussion of her family background. She had spent years trying to distance herself from that part of her life, and the military had seemed like the perfect escape from expectations she could never meet. "Instead of accepting any of those scholarships," Harrison continued, "you enlisted in the Army at 18. Basic training at Fort Leonard Wood, advanced individual training as a combat engineer, deployment to Afghanistan with the 10th Mountain Division. Exemplary service record, Purple Heart, Bronze Star for Valor during action in Kiener Province." "Yes, sir," Sarah replied when it became clear he was waiting for acknowledgement. "What's interesting," Harrison said, leaning forward, "is what's not in your official military record." Sarah's pulse quickened. Every soldier had aspects of their background that didn't make it into official files, but she had always assumed her secrets were buried deep enough to stay hidden. Apparently, she had been wrong. Colonel Harrison opened a thin file and pulled out a single photograph. Sarah's breath caught as she recognized the image. Herself at age 13, standing beside her parents at a science fair, where she had demonstrated a project involving advanced cryptography and pattern recognition. "The Black Viper Protocol," Harrison said quietly. "Does that phrase mean anything to you?" The world seemed to tilt sideways. Sarah had not heard those words spoken aloud in over a decade, and their appearance in this context felt like stepping into an alternate reality. The Black Viper Protocol was supposed to be buried so deep that even she sometimes wondered if it had been real. "I'm not sure what you're referring to, sir," she said carefully. Harrison smiled, but it wasn't a pleasant expression. "Staff Sergeant Chun, we both know that's not true. You were part of a highly classified program designed to identify and develop individuals with exceptional pattern recognition abilities and tactical intuition. The military applications were considered so sensitive that the entire project was officially terminated when you were 14. Sarah stared at the photograph, memories flooding back despite years of trying to suppress them. The endless tests disguised as games. The men in suits who asked questions that seemed innocent but felt dangerous. The way her parents' research suddenly shifted focus, and how they started looking at her like she was a specimen rather than their daughter. The program was disbanded, Harrison continued, but the assessment data was preserved. According to those files, you demonstrated capabilities that exceeded anything the researchers had previously documented. Pattern recognition that approached precognitive levels. Tactical analysis that consistently outperformed computer modeling. "Sir, I was just a kid playing games," Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. Games that involved predicting enemy movement patterns from incomplete data. Games that required identifying threats in complex scenarios faster than trained intelligence analysts. Games that you consistently won even when the parameters were adjusted to ensure failure. Colonel Harrison pulled out another document, this one bearing Official Department of Defense letterhead. The Black Viper Assessment Protocol was designed to identify individuals who could process tactical information in ways that conventional training couldn't replicate. You scored in the 99th percentile across all evaluation criteria. Sarah felt like she was drowning in quicksand. Everything she had built for herself in the military, every achievement she had earned through sweat and determination, suddenly felt like it had been predetermined by experiments conducted when she was still a child. "Is that why I'm here?" she asked. "Because of some tests I took 15 years ago?" "You're here because 3 months ago, when your application for Ranger training was submitted, it triggered a flag in the system. The artificial intelligence algorithms we use to screen candidates identified patterns in your performance data that matched the Black Viper profile." Harrison stood up and walked to a wall map that showed global military operations. Red pins marked locations Sarah assumed represented active conflicts, while blue pins indicated areas of strategic interest. "The nature of warfare is changing, Staff Sergeant. We're not just fighting enemies with guns and bombs anymore. We're fighting networks that adapt faster than traditional military thinking can counter. We need soldiers who can think 3 moves ahead, who can see patterns that others miss, who can make tactical decisions based on incomplete information." "Sir, respectfully, every soldier is trained to make decisions with incomplete information." "True," Harrison agreed, turning back to face her. "But most soldiers are trained to follow doctrine and procedures. You naturally think outside established patterns." That navigation exercise this morning was a perfect example. Sarah's confusion must have shown on her face because Harrison smiled again, this time with what might have been approval. "Your route selection wasn't just efficient, it was inspired. You identified a path that none of your instructors had considered optimal. When you were challenged by Davidson, you maintained course based on tactical intuition rather than backing down or compromising. And when you detected surveillance, your response was textbook special operations despite having no formal training in those procedures." "I was just doing my job, sir." "No, Staff Sergeant. You were demonstrating exactly the capabilities that the Black Viper Protocol was designed to identify." Harrison returned to his desk and opened yet another file. "Which brings us to why you're really here." Sarah braced herself for whatever was coming next. In her experience, when senior officers started referencing classified programs and childhood assessments, the conversation was heading toward something that would fundamentally change her life, whether she wanted it to or not. "The Pentagon has authorized the reactivation of Black Viper as an operational program," Harrison said. "Not for research this time, but for active deployment. We're assembling a unit of individuals who demonstrated exceptional assessment scores, and we want you to be part of it." The offer hung in the air between them, like smoke from a fired weapon. Sarah understood that this wasn't really a choice in the traditional sense. When the military decided it needed your specific skills, refusal was theoretically possible, but practically career suicide. "What would this unit do, sir?" "Classified operations requiring enhanced tactical intuition and pattern recognition. Missions where conventional approaches have failed or considered unsuitable. Situations where the ability to think several moves ahead could mean the difference between success and catastrophe." Sarah thought about the morning training exercise and how natural it had felt to anticipate the challenges they would face on their route. She thought about her deployment in Afghanistan and the times when something had felt wrong despite everything appearing normal on the surface. Those instincts had kept her and her soldiers alive, but she had always attributed them to experience and training. "How many others are in this unit?" "Currently, 7 active members. Your addition would make 8. All are individuals who scored exceptionally on the Black Viper assessments, though most participated when they were older than you were." Harrison pulled out photographs of 6 men and 1 woman, all in military uniforms with ranks ranging from staff sergeant to lieutenant colonel. Sarah studied their faces, noting the same hard-earned confidence she saw in veteran special operations soldiers. "You would complete your current training program first," Harrison explained. "Ranger qualification is considered a prerequisite for Black Viper operational status. After that, you would undergo additional specialized training before being assigned to your first mission." Sarah stared at the photographs, trying to process the magnitude of what was being offered. 3 months ago, she had been a combat engineer trying to prove she belonged in Ranger training. Now she was being recruited for a program that sounded like science fiction. "Sir, what if I don't want this assignment?" Colonel Harrison's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes that reminded Sarah she was dealing with a man who had spent decades making impossible decisions. "Then you would complete Ranger training and return to your previous military occupational specialty," he said. "Your security clearance will be adjusted to ensure you never discuss this conversation with anyone. Your career would proceed normally, but certain opportunities would no longer be available to you." The threat was politely delivered, but unmistakable. Sarah understood that she was being given a choice between embracing a destiny that had been mapped out for her as a child or accepting a future with artificial limitations imposed by the same system that had identified her potential. "Can I have time to think about it?" "You have until the end of your current training cycle," Harrison said. 6 weeks from today. "But understand that this opportunity won't be offered again. The Black Viper program is moving forward with or without you." Sarah nodded, her mind already racing through the implications of both choices. The safe path would mean returning to a military career that felt increasingly hollow, knowing that she had walked away from something extraordinary. The risky path led into unknown territory that could either fulfill her potential or destroy everything she had worked to build. In the meantime, Harrison said, standing to signal the end of their meeting, "Your training will continue as normal. Your instructors have been briefed that you're being considered for advanced assignment, but they don't know the details. How you perform over the next 6 weeks will factor into the final decision about your suitability." Sarah stood and came to attention. "Understood, sir. One more thing, Staff Sergeant." Harrison's voice stopped her as she reached the door. "The abilities that made you exceptional as a 13-year-old are still there. Don't be afraid to use them." As Sarah walked back across the base toward her barracks, her mind struggled to process everything that had just happened. The other trainees were preparing for evening training. Their conversations focused on the normal concerns of soldiers trying to earn their places in an elite unit. None of them knew that her presence among them had been orchestrated by forces beyond their comprehension. The irony wasn't lost on her. For 3 months, she had fought to prove that she deserved to be treated like every other candidate in the program. Now she had learned that she had never been like every other candidate. Her entire military career had been shaped by assessments and observations that began when she was still a child. That evening, as she lay in her narrow bunk listening to the sounds of 46 other soldiers trying to sleep, Sarah found herself thinking about the navigation exercise that morning. She had chosen their route based on what felt right rather than what the textbook would have recommended. When Davidson had challenged her leadership, she had held her ground not because of regulations or doctrine, but because something deep inside her had insisted that compromising would lead to failure. Were those instincts the product of the Black Viper protocol, or were they simply the result of experience and training? Did it matter where they came from if they kept people alive and mission successful? Sarah closed her eyes and tried to imagine herself 6 weeks from now, faced with the choice that would define the rest of her life. In the darkness behind her eyelids, patterns began to emerge like constellations in the night sky. Possible futures branching out in infinite directions, each choice creating new possibilities and eliminating others. For the first time since childhood, she allowed herself to follow those patterns wherever they led, trusting her mind to show her what lay ahead in the shadows where conventional thinking feared to go. What she saw there both terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. The night mission that would change everything began with Master Sergeant Rodriguez announcing that their usual sleep schedule was hereby terminated. At 0200 hours, sirens wailed through the barracks, and emergency lights bathed everything in hellish red. Sarah rolled out of her bunk with the practiced efficiency of a soldier accustomed to sudden alerts, but something felt different about this particular exercise. Full gear, weapons check, formation in 5 minutes. Rodriguez's voice cut through the chaos of soldiers scrambling for equipment. "This is not a drill." Sarah pulled on her tactical vest and grabbed her M4 carbine, muscle memory guiding her movements even as her mind processed the unusual circumstances. Normal training exercises were scheduled and predictable. Middle-of-the-night alerts with live ammunition suggested something far more serious was happening. The formation area buzzed with nervous energy as 47 candidates assembled under the harsh glare of floodlights. Sarah noticed several instructors she didn't recognize, men and women whose bearing suggested they came from units that operated in shadows. One of them, a woman with captain's bars and scars that spoke of hard-earned experience, caught Sarah's attention. Captain Torres had the kind of presence that made people step aside without conscious thought. Her dark eyes swept across the assembled trainees with the precision of a predator assessing potential prey. When her gaze met Sarah's, something passed between them that felt like recognition. "Listen up," Rodriguez announced, his usual commanding tone elevated to something approaching urgent. "Intelligence has identified a credible threat to this installation. Unknown hostile forces have penetrated the outer perimeter. Your mission is to locate and neutralize these threats using everything you've learned in training." A ripple of surprise passed through the group. Training exercises typically involved simulated enemies and blank ammunition. The weight of live rounds in their magazines suggested this was either the most realistic training they had yet experienced, or something genuine was happening on their base. Rules of engagement are simple. Captain Torres stepped forward to address the group. Positive identification before firing. Lethal force is authorized against armed hostiles. Non-combatants are to be secured and protected. She paused, letting the implications sink in. "Any questions?" Davidson raised his hand. "Ma'am, is this an actual terrorist attack?" Torres studied him for a moment before answering. "The nature of the threat is classified. Your job is to execute the mission regardless of whether the enemies are foreign terrorists, domestic threats, or OPFOR instructors with advanced simulation equipment." "Clear." "Yes, ma'am." The group responded in unison, though Sarah could hear uncertainty in several voices. "Chun," Torres called out, causing Sarah to snap to attention. "You're designated team leader for Alpha Element. Take Martinez, Williams, Jackson, and Kowalski. Your sector is the northern perimeter from Checkpoint 7 to the communications array." Sarah felt every eye in the formation focus on her with laser intensity. Being selected to lead during an actual security response was an honor that came with crushing responsibility. If this was real, people could die based on her decisions. If it was training, her performance would be scrutinized by instructors whose evaluations could end her military career. "Roger, ma'am," Sarah replied, accepting the radio headset and tactical map Torres offered her. As the formation broke up into assigned elements, Sarah gathered her team around a fold-out table where the sector map lay illuminated by red-filtered flashlights. The northern perimeter covered roughly 2 square miles of mixed terrain, including dense forest, open training areas, and several buildings housing sensitive communications equipment. Primary objective is threat detection and neutralization, Sarah briefed her team, pointing to key locations on the map. Secondary objective is protection of critical infrastructure. She looked each soldier in the eye. "Questions or concerns?" Martinez shifted nervously. "Sergeant Chun, what if we actually encounter real hostiles? I mean, people trying to kill us for real?" Sarah had been wondering the same thing, but her team needed confidence from their leader, not shared anxiety. "Then, we do our jobs," she said simply. "We're soldiers. This is what we trained for." Williams nodded grimly. "Rules of engagement are clear. We identify threats. We eliminate threats." "Exactly," Sarah confirmed. "But remember, positive identification is mandatory. We don't shoot unless we're certain we have legitimate targets." Jackson, the team's communications specialist, finished checking his radio equipment. "Comms are solid. We'll have contact with command and the other elements." Sarah studied the map one final time, her mind automatically processing tactical considerations and potential threat vectors. Something nagged at her about the mission parameters, but she couldn't identify exactly what felt wrong. The logical part of her brain insisted this was an elaborate training exercise, but her instincts suggested something more complex was happening. "Move out," she ordered, shouldering her pack. The northern perimeter stretched out before them like alien landscape under the green glow of night vision goggles. Sarah led her team through the forest with careful attention to noise discipline and tactical spacing. Every shadow could hide an enemy. Every sound could signal approaching danger. 20 minutes into their patrol, Jackson held up his fist, signaling contact. Sarah immediately dropped to one knee and strained her ears for whatever had caught his attention. After several seconds of absolute silence, she heard it, the soft crackle of radio communication somewhere ahead of them. Sarah hand signaled for the team to spread out into a tactical formation. Through her night vision scope, she could make out two figures positioned near the base of the communications tower. They wore military-style clothing, but carried equipment she didn't recognize. More importantly, they were clearly attempting to tamper with critical infrastructure. "Command, this is Alpha Element," Sarah whispered into her radio. "We have eyes on two potential hostiles at the communications array. Request guidance on rules of engagement." Static filled her earpiece for several seconds before Torres responded. "Alpha Element, you are cleared to engage if threats are confirmed hostile. Use your judgment, but protect that equipment." Sarah studied the figures through her scope, trying to determine their intent and identity. One appeared to be installing some kind of device on the tower support structure, while the other provided security. Their movements were professional and coordinated, suggesting military or paramilitary training. "What do you think?" Williams whispered from his position 10 meters to her right. Sarah watched the figures for another 30 seconds, her mind processing everything she observed. Their equipment wasn't standard military issue. Their positioning showed tactical awareness, but not the kind of paranoid hypervigilance she would expect from actual terrorists. Most importantly, their body language suggested they were following a script rather than reacting to genuine threat conditions. "It's training," she whispered back, "but we treat it as real." She hand-signaled her team to move into assault positions. If these were Op 4 instructors playing hostile infiltrators, they would expect to be detected and engaged. Sarah's job was to demonstrate proper tactical response regardless of whether the threat was genuine. "Alpha Element moving to engage," she reported over the radio. Sarah led her team in a coordinated approach that utilized available cover and concealment. The figures at the communications tower remained focused on their task, apparently unaware of approaching soldiers. When Sarah's team was positioned within effective engagement range, she made her final assessment. Both targets carried weapons and were actively sabotaging critical infrastructure. Under the rules of engagement Torres had outlined, they qualified as legitimate threats requiring immediate neutralization. "Freeze!" Sarah shouted, her weapon trained on the nearest figure. "Drop your weapons and get on the ground." The response was immediate and violent. Both figures spun toward her team with weapons raised, confirming their hostile intent. Sarah's training took over, and she squeezed her trigger twice in rapid succession. The sharp crack of her M4 echoed through the forest as her targets stumbled and fell. Around her, Williams, Martinez, and Jackson engaged the second target with concentrated fire. The exercise concluded as quickly as it had begun, leaving two Op 4 instructors lying on the ground with laser tag sensors flashing red to indicate simulated casualties. "Command, this is Alpha Element," Sarah reported, her heart still racing from the adrenaline surge. "Two hostiles neutralized at communications array. Area secure." "Outstanding work, Alpha Element," Torres responded, her voice carrying what sounded like genuine approval. "Maintain position for follow-up assessment." As Sarah's team established a security perimeter around the communications tower, she found herself analyzing every aspect of the engagement. Her team had performed flawlessly, but something still felt wrong about the entire scenario. The Op 4 instructors had been positioned almost perfectly for detection and engagement, as if the exercise was designed to create a specific outcome rather than test their abilities under uncertain conditions. Captain Torres arrived 15 minutes later with a full assessment team. The two Op 4 instructors were already back on their feet, discussing the engagement with obvious satisfaction. Sarah noticed they seemed particularly interested in her performance, taking extensive notes about her team's approach and tactics. "Excellent work, Sergeant Chun," Torres said, pulling Sarah aside for a private debrief. "Your team demonstrated superior tactical awareness and engagement procedures." "Thank you, ma'am," Sarah replied. though her confusion must have shown on her face. Something bothering you about the exercise? Sarah hesitated. Questioning the training scenarios was generally not encouraged, but Torres seemed genuinely interested in her perspective. The enemy positioning seemed almost optimal for our success, she said carefully. In a real situation, I would expect more sophisticated concealment and security measures. Torres smiled, and Sarah caught a glimpse of something that might have been satisfaction in the captain's expression. What would you have done differently if you were planning the infiltration? The question surprised Sarah. Instructors typically focused on critiquing student performance rather than asking for alternative tactical assessments. But as she considered the scenario from the enemy perspective, patterns began emerging in her mind. I would have positioned security elements to observe likely approach routes, she said, thinking through the tactical problem. The tower location offers multiple concealment positions that weren't utilized. A real enemy team would have detected our approach much earlier. And then, Sarah found herself speaking before she had fully formulated her thoughts. Early warning would allow them to either abort the mission or prepare an ambush. The fact that they remained focused on their task suggests they were confident in their security, which indicates either overconfidence or knowledge that detection was expected. Torres nodded slowly, making notes on her clipboard. Anything else? The equipment they were installing, Sarah continued, her analytical mind working through details she hadn't consciously noticed during the engagement. It looked functional, but wasn't actually connected to anything vital. Like a prop designed to provide mission justification without real consequences. Very good, Torres said, her approval unmistakable. Most soldiers would focus on their own performance and assume the scenario was realistic. You identified multiple indicators that this was a training exercise while still executing appropriate tactical response. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine as understanding began to dawn. Ma'am, was this exercise designed specifically to test analytical thinking rather than tactical skills? Among other things, Torres replied. Your ability to process multiple layers of information simultaneously while maintaining operational effectiveness is exactly what we were evaluating. The pieces fell into place with crystalline clarity. This wasn't random training. It was another assessment related to the Black Viper protocol. Every decision she had made, every observation she had shared, was being evaluated against criteria she didn't fully understand. Ma'am, is this related to my conversation with Colonel Harrison? Torres closed her clipboard and studied Sarah with eyes that revealed nothing. Sergeant Chun, some questions are above your current clearance level. What I can tell you is that your performance tonight exceeded expectations. As the assessment team packed up their equipment and the exercise officially concluded, Sarah found herself walking back through the forest with more questions than answers. Her team chatted quietly about the night's events, analyzing their performance and speculating about upcoming training challenges. None of them suspected that the exercise had been designed around her specific evaluation rather than their collective development. Back in the barracks, as she cleaned her weapon and prepared for what remained of the night, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that she was being maneuvered toward a destination she couldn't see. Every training exercise, every evaluation, every conversation with senior officers seemed designed to push her toward accepting the Black Viper assignment. The question that kept her awake until dawn was whether she was making choices about her future, or whether her future had already been decided by people who understood her capabilities better than she understood them herself. In the darkness, patterns swirled behind her closed eyes like storm systems on a weather map. But for the first time since childhood, instead of fighting against them, she found herself wondering what they might reveal if she allowed them to guide her toward whatever destiny awaited in the shadows ahead. The revelation came during what was supposed to be a routine weapons maintenance session. Sarah sat in the armory, cleaning her M4 carbine, while around her, fellow trainees performed the same ritual that connected soldiers across generations. The familiar smell of gun oil and the rhythmic sounds of metal on metal created an almost meditative atmosphere that made the sudden appearance of Corporal Davidson feel like an intrusion. "Chun, we need to talk," Davidson said, his voice carrying an urgency that immediately put Sarah on alert. She looked up from the bolt carrier group she was inspecting, noting that Davidson's usual antagonistic demeanor had been replaced by something that looked almost like concern. Around them, other soldiers continued their weapon maintenance, but Sarah could sense the subtle shift in attention that meant their conversation was being monitored. "What about?" she asked, setting down her cleaning rod. Davidson glanced around the armory before moving closer. "Not here. Meet me at the obstacle course after evening chow. Come alone." The request was highly irregular. Trainees were discouraged from conducting private meetings that could undermine unit cohesion, and Davidson's previous hostility made this invitation particularly suspicious. But something in his tone suggested genuine urgency rather than another attempt at intimidation. "Why?" Sarah asked. "Because there are things about this program you need to know," Davidson replied quietly. "Things they're not telling you." He walked away before Sarah could respond, leaving her staring at his retreating figure with a dozen questions racing through her mind. The cryptic warning felt like a puzzle piece that might complete a picture she had been unconsciously assembling for weeks. The rest of the day passed with mechanical routine, but Sarah found herself analyzing every interaction with instructors and fellow trainees for hidden meaning. During tactical exercises, she noticed subtle variations in how she was evaluated compared to other soldiers. During classroom instruction, questions seemed tailored to assess her analytical thinking rather than test her knowledge of standard procedures. Most disturbing was her growing awareness that other trainees were watching her with the kind of attention usually reserved for potential threats. Not open hostility, but careful observation that suggested they had been briefed about something she didn't know. Evening chow was a subdued affair, with conversations focused on the approaching final phase of training. In 2 weeks, successful candidates would graduate and receive their ranger qualifications. Those who failed would be recycled to other units with varying degrees of career damage. The pressure was intensifying daily, but Sarah sensed undercurrents of tension that went beyond normal training stress. As darkness settled over Fort Bragg, Sarah made her way to the obstacle course where Davidson waited in the shadows near the rope climb tower. He had chosen a location that offered multiple escape routes while providing concealment from casual observation. His positioning suggested military police or intelligence training that went beyond what appeared in his official records. "You came," Davidson said as she approached. "You said there were things I needed to know," Sarah replied, maintaining a safe distance. "I'm listening." Davidson studied her for a long moment, as if trying to assess her trustworthiness. "How much do you know about why you're really here?" The question struck too close to home for comfort. Sarah's conversation with Colonel Harrison was classified at levels that prohibited discussion with anyone lacking appropriate clearance, but Davidson's question suggested he might already know more than he should. "I'm here to earn my Ranger tab like everyone else," she said carefully. "Bullshit," Davidson replied bluntly. "I've been in special operations for 8 years. I know when training is normal and when it's something else. This program isn't about creating Rangers, Chun. It's about identifying and developing specific individuals for classified assignments." Sarah felt her pulse quicken. "What makes you think that?" Davidson pulled out a small digital recorder and pressed play. Sarah's breath caught as she heard her own voice from the night exercise 3 days earlier, discussing tactical analysis with Captain Torres. The recording quality was too clear to have been captured by standard surveillance equipment. "Where did you get that?" she demanded. "Sources I can't reveal," Davidson said, pocketing the device. "But what matters is what it represents. Every conversation you have with instructors is being recorded and analyzed. Every decision you make is being evaluated against criteria that have nothing to do with Ranger qualification." Sarah's mind raced through the implications. If Davidson was telling the truth, then her paranoia about being constantly assessed was actually justified. But his willingness to share this information suggested motivations she couldn't determine. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked. Davidson's expression hardened. "Because I don't like being manipulated. And because you deserve to know that your presence here isn't coincidental." "What do you mean?" "The selection process for this training class was rigged," Davidson said. "Not the physical and psychological evaluations, but the initial screening. Certain candidates were specifically recruited while others were deliberately excluded. You're here because someone wanted you here, not because you earned it through normal channels." The accusation hit Sarah like a physical blow. Everything she had accomplished, every barrier she had overcome to prove herself worthy of elite training, suddenly felt hollow and artificial. Had her achievements been meaningless because powerful forces had been manipulating events behind the scenes? That's impossible, she said, but even as the words left her mouth, she knew they weren't true. Is it? Davidson challenged. Think about your application process. How quickly was it approved? How many obstacles did you expect to face that mysteriously disappeared? How many people told you that your chances were minimal, then watched in surprise when you were accepted? Sarah remembered the weeks of bureaucratic battles that had suddenly resolved themselves with unusual speed. Phone calls that were returned immediately instead of being ignored. Paperwork that was processed ahead of schedule rather than buried in endless review cycles. At the time, she had attributed the efficiency to luck and persistence, but now a darker possibility emerged. Who would have the authority to manipulate selection processes? She asked. People operating at classification levels neither of us have access to, Davidson replied. Black budget programs that answered directly to the Pentagon or intelligence agencies. The kind of operations that officially don't exist. Sarah thought about her conversation with Colonel Harrison and his references to the Black Viper Protocol. How much of what was happening to her was the result of assessments conducted when she was 13 years old? Had her entire military career been orchestrated by people who saw her as a resource to be developed rather than a person making her own choices? What do you want from me? She asked. Davidson stepped closer, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. I want you to help me find out what's really happening here. You have access to information that I don't. Instructors are more willing to discuss things with you because they see you as a priority candidate. And if I refuse, then you continue being a pawn in someone else's game, Davidson said. But at least you'll know that's what you are. Sarah weighed her options carefully. Davidson's hostility during training suddenly made more sense if he had been suspicious of her presence from the beginning. His offer to collaborate represented either a genuine attempt to uncover the truth or an elaborate trap designed to test her loyalty to whatever program was actually running this training. What kind of information are you looking for? She asked. Documentation about the real selection criteria, Davidson replied. Personnel files that show who made the final decisions about class composition. Communication records between instructors and higher headquarters about specific candidates. That's all classified material. Even if I could access it, possession would be a court-martial offense. Only if we get caught, Davidson said. And only if what we find isn't significant enough to provide whistleblower protection. Sarah stared at him in the darkness, trying to read his motivations and assess the risks. Everything about this conversation violated military protocol and could destroy her career if discovered. But the alternative was accepting that she had no real control over her own destiny. I need time to think about it, she said finally. You have 24 hours, Davidson replied. After that, I proceed without your help. But, Chen, whatever you decide, watch your back. People who know too much about classified programs have a tendency to experience unfortunate training accidents. The implied threat sent ice through Sarah's veins. Military training was inherently dangerous, and accidents that resulted in injury or death were investigated, but rarely questioned if they occurred during high-risk exercises. Davidson was suggesting that her knowledge about the Black Viper Protocol made her a potential liability to be eliminated if she became problematic. As she walked back to the barracks, Sarah's mind churned through everything Davidson had revealed. His warning about training accidents felt particularly ominous given the increasing complexity and realism of their exercises. How easy would it be to arrange a scenario where she suffered a fatal mishap that appeared completely accidental? More disturbing was the realization that she was caught between competing forces she didn't fully understand. Colonel Harrison wanted her to accept assignment to a classified program that could either fulfill her potential or destroy her life. Davidson wanted her to help expose secrets that could protect her from manipulation or result in criminal charges for espionage. Both paths led into territory where safety and survival depended on making correct decisions about people whose true motivations remained hidden. That night, As she lay in her bunk listening to the peaceful sounds of soldiers sleeping, Sarah allowed her mind to drift into the pattern recognition state she had learned to access as a child. Instead of fighting against the flood of connections and possibilities, she opened herself to whatever insights might emerge from the chaos. What she saw in the swirling darkness behind her closed eyes was a web of intersecting agendas that stretched far beyond her individual situation. The Black Viper Protocol was more than a military program. It was part of a larger strategy to identify and control individuals whose capabilities exceeded normal human parameters. She was not the only one being evaluated, developed, and potentially manipulated. But she was perhaps the only one who had developed enough awareness to recognize what was happening before it was too late to resist. The question that would determine everything was whether resistance was possible or whether the forces arrayed against her were too powerful to overcome through individual action alone. As dawn approached, Sarah made her decision about Davidson's offer. But more importantly, she began formulating a strategy that went beyond simple cooperation or refusal. If powerful people were playing games with her life, then it was time to learn the rules and start playing to win. The next 24 hours would either provide her with allies in a fight she was only beginning to understand, or reveal that she was more alone and vulnerable than she had ever imagined possible. The final confrontation began with Colonel Harrison's unexpected announcement that graduation had been moved up by 1 week. As Sarah stood in formation with her fellow candidates, she recognized the tactical significance of the schedule change. Someone had decided that events were moving too quickly to follow the original timeline. Due to operational requirements, Harrison said, his eyes scanning the assembled trainees with laser precision, final evaluations will begin immediately. Only those demonstrating exceptional performance will receive Ranger qualification. Sarah felt Davidson's tension beside her, though his expression remained neutral. Their covert investigation over the past week had uncovered evidence that confirmed his worst suspicions about the program's true nature. Hidden in classified communication logs, they had found references to asset development and operational deployment timelines that had nothing to do with traditional Ranger training. More disturbing were the psychological evaluation reports that described candidates in terms of potential for specialized application rather than military readiness. Sarah's file contained assessments that referenced her childhood Black Viper scores and recommendations for immediate activation upon program completion. The investigation had also revealed that she wasn't the only candidate being manipulated. At least 6 others had been specifically recruited based on classified criteria, though their backgrounds and capabilities varied significantly. The training program was serving as a cover for talent identification and development on behalf of operations that officially didn't exist. Chun, Davidson, Williams, Martinez, Jackson, Torres, Kowalski, and Zhang, Harrison called out. Report to Building 18 for individual assessment. Everyone else, prepare for standard graduation procedures. Sarah's stomach clenched as she recognized the names. These were exactly the 8 individuals whose files had been flagged for special attention in the document she and Davidson had uncovered. The fact that they were being separated from the main group suggested that the real purpose of their training was about to be revealed. Building 18 was the same classified facility where Sarah had first learned about the Black Viper Protocol. As the 8 selected candidates filed into the briefing room, she noticed the same wall maps and secure communication equipment, but additional personnel were present. Men and women in civilian clothes with the bearing of intelligence operatives, their faces carefully neutral as they studied the assembled soldiers. Colonel Harrison took his position at the front of the room while Captain Torres moved to secure the door behind them. The click of the electronic lock engaging sent a chill through Sarah as she realized they were now physically trapped until the briefing concluded. Congratulations, Harrison began, his tone suggesting anything but celebration. You 8 represent the most promising candidates to emerge from the Ranger training program in the past 5 years. Your psychological profiles, tactical capabilities, and analytical skills place you in the top percentile of military personnel worldwide. Sarah glanced at Davidson, catching the subtle nod that confirmed their shared understanding. This was the moment they had been preparing for, when speculation would become fact and decisions would have irreversible consequences. You have been selected for immediate assignment to Operation Black Viper, Harrison continued. This is a classified program designed to address threats that conventional military units cannot effectively counter. Your participation is voluntary in the legal sense, but refusal will result in immediate reassignment to positions commensurate with your security clearance limitations. The threat was delivered with bureaucratic precision, but its meaning was unmistakable. Accept the assignment or face career destruction through administrative manipulation. Sarah had seen similar tactics used against whistleblowers and personnel who possessed inconvenient knowledge about classified operations. What kind of threats? Williams asked, his voice carefully controlled. One of the civilian operatives stepped forward to answer. She appeared to be in her 40s, with prematurely gray hair and eyes that had seen too much of whatever world she inhabited. Asymmetric warfare, conducted by organizations that operate outside traditional command structures, she said. Terror networks that adapt faster than conventional intelligence can track. Criminal organizations with resources that rival nation-states. Technological threats that require enhanced pattern recognition and tactical intuition to counter effectively. Sarah noticed that the woman's explanation focused on capabilities rather than specific enemies. The vagueness suggested that Black Viper operatives would be deployed against any target that higher authorities deemed suitable for their particular skills, regardless of legal or moral considerations. How long are these assignments? Martinez asked. Variable, Harrison replied. Mission requirements dictate deployment length. Some operations conclude within weeks. Others require months or years of sustained commitment. And if you want to leave the program after accepting assignment? Jackson pressed. The silence that followed his question stretched uncomfortably long. Finally, Captain Torres spoke up with the kind of clinical detachment Sarah associated with medical examiners. Black Viper operatives are considered strategic assets, Torres said. Voluntary separation from the program requires extensive psychological evaluation and security review. In most cases, personnel who request separation are reassigned to positions that utilize their specialized training while maintaining operational security. Sarah understood the implication immediately. Once you joined Black Viper, leaving was virtually impossible. The program was designed to create a permanent cadre of operatives whose lives would be controlled by the same forces that had manipulated their recruitment and training. I have questions, Sarah said, deciding that direct confrontation was preferable to passive acceptance. Harrison nodded. Proceed. Are we being recruited for legal military operations, or are we being asked to participate in activities that violate domestic and international law? The question dropped into the briefing room like a live grenade. Several of the civilian operatives exchanged glances that suggested Sarah had identified a sensitive area they had hoped to avoid addressing directly. All Black Viper operations are conducted under appropriate legal authority, Harrison said carefully. However, the nature of these missions may require actions that would be inappropriate for conventional military units. Meaning what exactly? Sarah pressed. The gray-haired woman stepped forward again, her expression hardening. Meaning that effective counterterrorism and national security operations sometimes require flexibility in interpretation of traditional rules of engagement. Sarah felt a cold clarity settle over her mind as the full implications became clear. Black Viper wasn't just a special operations unit. It was a mechanism for conducting operations that regular military forces couldn't legally perform. Assassination, sabotage, torture, domestic surveillance, political manipulation, and any other activities that serve the interests of whoever controlled the program. And if we refuse? Davidson asked, his voice carefully neutral. Harrison consulted a file folder before answering. Corporal Davidson, your psychological evaluation indicates significant potential for specialized applications, but also notes concerns about authority acceptance and operational reliability. Refusal to accept Black Viper assignment would result in immediate administrative review of your security clearance and reassignment to duties appropriate for your revised status. The bureaucratic language couldn't disguise the fundamental threat. Davidson would be destroyed professionally and potentially prosecuted for security violations if he refused to cooperate. The same fate awaited any of them who chose resistance over compliance. Sarah looked around at her fellow candidates, noting varying degrees of understanding and concern on their faces. Martinez appeared confused, but willing to follow orders. Williams seemed troubled, but resigned to accepting whatever assignment he received. Jackson and Torres showed signs of genuine alarm as they processed the implications of what they were being asked to do. Zhang and Kowalski remained unreadable, their expressions suggesting either acceptance or careful concealment of their true reactions. Sarah realized that some of her fellow candidates might have already decided to embrace whatever opportunities the Black Viper program offered, regardless of moral considerations. "I need to understand something," Sarah said, her analytical mind working through the tactical situation. "The Black Viper assessments that identified us as suitable candidates were conducted years ago, when most of us were children or teenagers. How can you be certain that our current capabilities match those early evaluations?" Harrison smiled, but it wasn't a pleasant expression. "An excellent question, Staff Sergeant Chun. The answer is that your performance over the past 3 months has confirmed and exceeded the original assessments. Your tactical intuition, pattern recognition abilities, and capacity for independent decision-making under pressure have all demonstrated the exceptional levels that make you valuable operational assets. But not our moral flexibility?" Sarah asked quietly. The question hung in the air like smoke from a discharged weapon. Sarah had identified the fundamental issue that would determine not only her own fate, but the futures of everyone in the room. The Black Viper program needed operatives who could perform morally questionable actions without experiencing debilitating psychological consequences. "Moral considerations are contextual," the gray-haired woman said. "What appears questionable in peacetime may become necessary for national survival during crisis periods. Black Viper operatives are selected for their ability to make difficult decisions based on strategic rather than emotional factors." Sarah understood that she had reached a decision point that would define the rest of her life. Accept the assignment and become part of an organization that operated beyond normal legal and moral constraints. Refuse and face professional destruction and potential prosecution for knowledge she had never requested. But there was a third option that none of them had considered, and Sarah's enhanced pattern recognition abilities had identified it during the briefing. The same capabilities that made her valuable to the Black Viper program also provided her with tactical advantages that her recruiters had not fully appreciated. "I accept assignment to the Black Viper program," Sarah said clearly, her voice carrying across the silent briefing room. Around her, the other candidates began voicing their own acceptance, some with enthusiasm, others with obvious reluctance. Only Davidson remained silent, his jaw clenched as he weighed options that offered no acceptable outcome. "Corporal Davidson?" Harrison prompted. Davidson looked at Sarah, and she caught the slight nod that indicated his understanding of her strategy. Sometimes the only way to defeat a system was to infiltrate it completely and destroy it from within. "I accept assignment to the Black Viper program," Davidson said. As the briefing concluded and they were dismissed to begin preparation for their first operational deployment, Sarah allowed herself a moment of grim satisfaction. The forces that had manipulated her life since childhood believed they had successfully recruited her for their purposes. They were about to discover that 13-year-old test subjects sometimes grew up to become 27-year-old soldiers with their own agendas and the tactical skills to implement them. The real war was just beginning, and Sarah Chun intended to win it. 3 weeks later, as she stood in civilian clothes on a street corner in Prague, conducting surveillance on a target whose identity she had been ordered not to question, Sarah activated the encrypted communication device hidden in her jacket. The message she transmitted would reach Davidson and the network of resistance operatives they had carefully assembled from within the Black Viper program itself. The colonel had whispered that she bore a Black Viper mark, expecting it to define her limitations. Instead, she had chosen to make it the symbol of their rebellion. In the shadows between light and darkness, where conventional thinking fears to go, Sarah Chun had found her true calling. Not as a weapon in someone else's war, but as a guardian standing watch over those who could not protect themselves from the monsters that official policies could never acknowledge. The weak little girl from training had become something far more dangerous than her creators had ever imagined, a black viper with a conscience and the skills to act on it.